You're watching the Everything Network.
Did Nicky Scarfo run Philadelphia from prison? Nicky Scarfo's prison story is not the story of a patient boss trying to preserve an old administration. It is the story of a violent ruler whose own style had already burned the family before the prison walls closed around him. By the time Scarfo tried to keep control from behind bars, the Philadelphia crime family had already been reshaped by fear, greed, internal murder, and constant suspicion. Prison did not create his leadership problem. Prison exposed what his leadership had already done. Scarfo's mindset was built around total obedience. He did not see the family as a partnership of captains, old earners, and political allies. He saw it as a command structure with himself at the center. Every insult needed an answer. Every doubt looked like betrayal. Every earner owed him tribute, respect, and fear. In Atlantic City and Philadelphia, that mindset made him powerful fast. It also made enemies faster than he could replace them. The first part of Scarfo's rise came from chaos. Angelo Bruno was killed in 1980. Philip Testa took over, then died in a bomb attack in 1981. Scarfo stepped into the opening with a harder vision than the bosses before him. Bruno had preferred quiet money and political balance. Scarfo preferred open dominance. Atlantic City was changing with casino gambling, unions, construction vending, loan sharking, extortion, and service contracts. Scarfo saw the casinos as a new gold field, and he believed every shovel needed his permission. The people around him formed a dangerous administration. Philip "Crazy Phil" Leonetti, his nephew, became one of the closest men in the family, and later underboss. Chucky Molino held power as an older street figure and underboss before falling out of favor. Frank Monti was tied to administration power before his murder. Lawrence Yogi Molino, Salvatore Chucky Molino, Francis Faffi Iannarella, Joseph Chicky Shankaglini, Nicholas Nicky Buck Piccolo, Joseph Joey Pung Pungitor, and others moved through the Scarfo machine. Some were loyal, some were useful, some were afraid. In Scarfo's world, those categories could change overnight. The family's violence under Scarfo was not occasional background noise. It became the governing language. Harry Riccobene went to war against him. Salvatore Testa, the son of the murdered boss who had helped Scarfo rise, was later marked and killed after Scarfo came to see him as too popular and too independent. Frank Monte was murdered. The Riccobene faction was hunted. Men who had once been allies learned that loyalty under Scarfo did not guarantee safety if the boss felt threatened by their reputation. That is the key to understanding Scarfo from prison. He did not rule through trust. He ruled through fear, and fear weakens once the boss is locked away. A man on the street can appear suddenly, summon people, stare across a table, and make orders feel immediate. A man in prison has to rely on visits, lawyers, messages, relatives, and captains who may have their own survival plans. Scarfo still had the title, but the muscle of his presence was gone. The federal cases hit the family with enormous force. Scarfo and much of his circle were convicted in the late 80s on major racketeering charges, and the sentences were heavy enough to remove the top layer of the organization. Prison did not only take Scarfo away, it took away the men who had made his reign work. Once Leonetti, the Molinos, Iannarella, Pungitore, and other key figures were under pressure or locked up, the street no longer had a clean chain of command. The boss was gone, the underboss was exposed, and the family's fear network had turned into evidence. Leonetti became the devastating break. He was not a fringe member. He was Scarfo's nephew, underboss, and one of the men closest to the violence and decision-making. When Leonetti cooperated, he did more than damage cases. He destroyed the inner myth of Scarfo's control. A boss can survive a soldier talking. A boss can even survive a captain talking if the family closes ranks. But when the nephew and underboss explains the house from inside, the walls come down differently. Scarfo still tried to remain the boss. In his mind, prison did not retire him. The title still belonged to him. The Philadelphia family was still supposed to answer upward, even if upward now meant a federal institution instead of an Atlantic City table. That was the Scarfo instinct. The government could move his body, but no one on the street had permission to take his name off the chair. The problem was that Philadelphia needed reconstruction, not just command. A family battered by trials, murders, informants, and internal fear needs someone outside who can calm captains, restart earning, repair alliances, and lower the heat. Scarfo was not built for calming anything. His reputation still scared people, but the same reputation also reminded everyone why the family was broken. A prison boss with a record of killing allies cannot easily inspire a wounded family to wait for him. Anthony Tony Buck, Piccolo, became part of the post-Scarfo street arrangement. He had old standing and was less explosive than Scarfo. Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino was still younger at the time, but his circle would later become central to the next Philadelphia era. Ralph Natali would eventually claim boss status after prison and help form another chapter in the family's instability. The street did not freeze around Scarfo. It started searching for a different future. Scarfo's connection from prison was real in a limited way. Men still knew who he was. Some still feared him, some still respected the old title. Messages could move, loyalists could carry his wishes, relatives and remaining allies could try to keep his claim alive. But the practical connection was badly damaged. Too many people had flipped, too many old allies were dead, too many captains had been removed, too many younger men saw the Scarfo era as a disaster they had inherited, not a throne they needed to protect. This is where Scarfo's prison rule failed harder than his title suggested. He had authority in memory, not in daily mechanics. He could not rebuild trust among men he had trained to mistrust each other. He could not restore the street after making fear the family's main form of communication. He could not stop younger factions from forming around their own futures. He could not erase Leonetti's cooperation or the damage from the racketeering cases. The family's mood after Scarfo was exhausted. Atlantic City money had promised a new empire, but Scarfo's greed and violence had brought indictments, bodies and informants. The old Bruno system had been quiet enough to last. Scarfo's system was loud in the wrong way. It made money, but it made enemies inside the family and outside it. It brought the government a clearer target. Once he was imprisoned, the organisation had little reason to keep copying the same model that had led them there. The men around Scarfo also learned that proximity to him was dangerous. Leonetti rose high, then turned witness. Salvatore Testa rose in status, then was killed. Chucky Merlino had standing, then was pushed aside and imprisoned. Riccobene fought and lost. Others were murdered, indicted or isolated. Scarfo did not leave behind a healthy bench of trusted leaders. He left behind survivors. Survivors do not always preserve a boss's legacy. Often they look for a way not to die with it. Scarfo's son, Nicky Scarfo Jr., became part of the later shadow around the name, but he did not inherit Philadelphia cleanly. The Scarfo name still carried weight, but it also carried baggage. Younger Philadelphia figures did not want to live under the father's ghost forever. Later, Scarfo Jr. moved through different alliances and legal trouble of his own, but he never became the simple continuation of his father's Philadelphia throne. The name survived. The command structure did not. The real question is whether Scarfo had a hands-on connection after prison. The answer is yes at first, then weaker with every year. In the beginning, his title and loyalists still mattered. The street still had to consider what he wanted. But a prison connection depends on men outside accepting the risk of carrying orders. Under Scarfo, that risk looked heavy and unrewarding. Why carry the orders of a boss whose reign had already filled prisons and cemeteries? That question weakened him more than any official demotion. His ruling style worked while he was free enough to enforce it. Once locked away, that same style turned against him. Fear can command a room. It cannot easily rebuild a family from a distance. Scarfo had trained men to obey under threat, not to believe in a shared future. When the boss could no longer appear in person, the belief was not strong enough to hold everyone in place. The Philadelphia family after Scarfo did not become instantly stable. It moved into another era of disputes, younger factions, contested leadership, and federal attention. But that instability does not mean Scarfo still controlled everything. It means his error left the family damaged. His absence did not create order. It created a vacuum where new names could rise, old claims could be tested, and the family could try to escape the shadow of a boss who had ruled too violently to be cleanly remembered. Scarfo's prison rule was successful only as a claim. He remained the former boss. He remained a feared name. He remained a symbol of the bloodiest Philadelphia era. But as a working system, it failed. The family did not continue as a smooth Scarfo government from behind bars. The street moved away from him, partly from necessity and partly from survival. A boss who burns too many bridges cannot rule the far side of the river after prison takes him away. The final answer is clear. Nicky Scarfo had real influence after prison, but not enough to keep Philadelphia under his hand. His connections existed, his reputation existed, his name still carried danger, but the family had been too battered by his own reign. Prison did not merely separate him from power. It revealed that his power had depended on immediate fear, constant violence, and personal presence. Once those tools were removed, the Scarfo system could not hold. A boss who ruled by terror tried to keep the crown after federal prison took him off the street. The title lingered, the name stayed feared, and loyalists remained in pockets. But the organization underneath had no reason to keep bleeding for a man whose leadership had already turned Philadelphia into a graveyard and a federal target. Scarfo kept the legend. He lost the working family. Did Carmine Persico really run the Colombos from prison? Carmine Persico's prison story is one of the strangest boss stories in New York Mafia history. He was not a fading old man with a title people politely repeated. He was not a ceremonial figure kept around for tradition. He was a boss who believed the chair still belonged to him, no matter where the government put his body. The walls changed the root of power, but in Persico's mind they did not change ownership. The Colombo family was his family, and prison did not make that negotiable. The mindset was built on survival. Persico had come through old Colombo violence, faction problems, federal pressure, street betrayal, and years of internal danger before the long prison era fully defined him. He understood the family as something fought for, not something borrowed for convenience. That made his view hard and simple. A man outside could act. A man outside could carry messages, collect money, settle disputes, and meet captains. But acting was not owning. That idea shaped the entire Colombo system around him. Every street boss, every panel, every captain, every relative, and every loyalist had to operate under the same invisible rule. Power on the street came from Persico's permission. The man in Brooklyn might hold the meeting, but the authority still flowed from the prison cell. That gave the family continuity, but it also created constant pressure. Men outside were expected to risk everything, while final legitimacy stayed behind the wall. Persico's closest structure was built through blood, loyalty, and old Colombo discipline. His brother Alphonse Ali Boy Persico mattered. His son Alphonse Little Ali Boy Persico mattered even more as the future he wanted protected. Gennaro Jerry Langella represented the older administration weight. Carmine Sessa became a critical messenger and consigliere figure. Andrew Russo, the Alloy brothers, William Wild Bill Cutolo, Gregory Scarpa, and other Colombo figures all became parts of a family map where every man's position was measured against Persico's prison authority. The difficulty was not simply giving orders from prison. The difficulty was keeping those orders pure after they travelled through other people. A message could be delayed. A warning could be softened. A captain could claim he misunderstood. A soldier could pretend loyalty while testing another faction. A street boss could report only what made him look necessary. Prison rule depends on messengers, and messengers become powerful the moment everyone needs them. Persico's system needed acting bosses, but acting bosses were dangerous by design. A weak acting boss could not protect the family. A strong acting boss might start to believe he had earned the throne. That was the central trap. Persico needed men outside who could command respect, handle money, meet other families, and control violence. But every strong outside man became a possible rival once he realized the daily job was in his hands. Victor Orena became the clearest example. Persico placed him in the acting boss role with serious authority. Orena was not treated like a minor caretaker. He could make members, he could approve murders, he could meet with other families, he could collect money, run disputes, and handle the street administration in real time. Those powers kept the Colombos functioning, but they also gave Orena the experience of being boss before he had the title. Orena's resentment grew from that contradiction. He was carrying the risk, holding the meetings, hearing the complaints, and dealing with captains who needed answers. Persico still held the crown from prison and still intended the future to move through his son. To Persico loyalists, that was continuity. To Orena's side, it looked like the family was being held in place for Persico blood. The acting boss began to think the word acting had become an insult. The family split did not appear overnight. It grew through whispers, slow loyalty tests, delayed tribute, private conversations, and captains wondering which side would control the next decade. Some men still saw Persico as the only legitimate boss. Others saw Orena as the man actually doing the work. The Colombo family entered a dangerous middle space where both arguments sounded real, depending on which room they were spoken in. Persico's prison authority was strongest among men who believed the family's history still belonged to him. His name carried the weight of old wars, old punishments, old survival, and old loyalty. He had not been installed by convenience. He had fought his way into permanent meaning inside the Colombo world. For those men, Orena was not a modernizer or a practical street leader. He was a caretaker, forgetting whose chair he was sitting in. Orena tried to make the challenge official. He wanted the captains polled. He wanted the family's real street support measured. He wanted the commission to acknowledge what he believed the street already understood. Carmine Sessa's role became decisive when he warned Persico instead of simply carrying Orena's plan forward. That warning turned a political challenge into a death matter. Persico answered the challenge with a murder order. The failed attempt on Orena near his Long Island home in June 1991 became the breaking point. A prison boss had reached through the wall and tried to remove the acting boss, but Orena survived. That survival changed the meaning of the entire conflict. Persico's power had shown itself, but the strike had failed. A failed hit in that world did not create fear alone. It created permission for war. The Colombo family then moved into open conflict. The Persico side fought to preserve the official boss, the bloodline, and the old structure. The Orena side fought for the idea that the working street leadership should no longer answer to a prison throne. This was not only a disagreement over money, it was a war over legitimacy. Who owned a family when the boss was locked away? The man with the title, or the man carrying the daily burden outside? The names around the war became part of the damage. Carmine Sessa survived his own dangers and remained tied to the Persico side. Nicky Scarfo became one of the most feared and controversial figures in the conflict. William Wild Bill Catolo stood as a powerful Colombo figure with real street and union weight. Joseph Scopo, Nicky Grancio, Hank Smurra, the Alloy faction, and other names moved through shootings, attempted hits, shifting alliances, and public heat. The family was no longer hiding its argument, it was bleeding it into the street. Nicky Scarfo's role gave Persico's side a violent edge and a permanent shadow. Scarfo was feared, aggressive, and deeply involved in the loyalist response. But his informant history and law enforcement controversy made the war even dirtier. The Colombo conflict was already dangerous enough as an internal mafia war. Scarfo's presence made it feel infected, with street violence and federal shadows crossing the same ground. The war proved Persico's reach and exposed the cost of that reach at the same time. Men still killed for him. Men still risked prison for him. Men still treated his authority as real, even with the boss locked away. That means the prison rule was not imaginary. It had muscle, memory, and consequences. But the price was enormous. The Colombo family lost men, money, secrecy, and stability while trying to answer one question that would not go away. In the end, Persico won the formal argument. Orena went to prison. The Persico faction survived. The title remained where Persico wanted it. The family did not crown the acting boss as the new permanent king. That matters inside the underworld record. The prison boss had been challenged by the man outside, and the prison boss remained the recognized power after the shooting stopped. But the victory was damaged. The Colombos came out weaker, more exposed, and more fractured. Law enforcement gained witnesses, cases, recordings, informants, and a clearer view of the family's internal structure. Captains learned how deep the split had gone. Soldiers saw that loyalty to one side could mean death from the other. The family survived, but survival after civil war is not the same as health. Persico's biggest difficulty was distance from reality, not ignorance. Distance. He could know the names, the disputes, the money lanes, and the faction problems. But he had to learn them through other people. Every outside figure became a filter. Every report came with motive attached. A boss in prison can still think clearly, but he cannot feel the temperature of a room the way a free boss can. That gap becomes dangerous over years. His second difficulty was succession. Persico wanted the future protected for his bloodline, especially little ally boy. That made sense from the Persico point of view. It also trapped the family in a dynastic struggle. Men who were not part of that bloodline could earn, kill, serve, and go to prison, but the highest future still looked reserved. That kind of arrangement creates loyalty among relatives and resentment among ambitious captains. His third difficulty was the acting boss problem. Every acting boss had to be strong enough to manage the family and weak enough not to threaten the boss. That combination is nearly impossible to maintain. If the acting boss is too soft, crews drift. If he is too strong, he starts attracting loyalty. Orena did not invent that problem. He exposed it. Persico's prison rule worked through fear, blood, history, and discipline. It worked through men who still believed his title was sacred. It worked through relatives who kept the family line alive. It worked through loyalists who preferred a prison boss they understood over an acting boss they considered disloyal. It worked through the old mafia truth that legitimacy can outlast physical presence when enough men still believe in it. It failed through exhaustion. A family cannot spend years translating every major decision through prison channels without losing speed and trust. A captain with a problem wants an answer. A racket under pressure needs movement. A war threat needs clarity. A prison boss can give orders, but the process is slower, riskier, and more vulnerable to betrayal. The longer it lasts, the more the family becomes built around managing the boss's absence. The real question is not only whether Persico ruled from prison. He did. The sharper question is what kind of family that created. It created a family that could not fully move on and could not fully relax under him. It created a family where loyalty to Persico became the organizing principle, even when that loyalty damaged earnings, stability, and street unity. It created a family where the boss's strength and the family's weakness became tied together. Persico's personal success was undeniable. He held the throne for decades. He defeated an acting boss who tried to replace him. He preserved the Persico line as the center of Colombo politics. He made prison rule more than a title. Men outside still acted on his authority, feared his response, and fought under his banner. Few bosses could have done that from a cell. The organizational result was much darker. The Colombo family remained alive, but wounded. It became known for internal war, prison succession, faction splits, and the long shadow of one boss who would not let go. That made Persico fascinating and formidable. It also made the family unstable in ways it never fully escaped. The boss survived the system. The family absorbed the damage. The final answer is this. Carmine Persico did rule the Colombos from prison, not perfectly, not smoothly, and not without enormous cost, but his authority was real. He had loyalists, relatives, messengers, history, and enough fear attached to his name to keep the title from being taken cleanly. His prison rule was successful as a personal hold on power. It was damaging as a governing system. That is the Persico prison era in its purest form. A boss behind bars kept a New York family under his shadow for decades. He turned absence into command, loyalty into structure, and bloodline into succession policy. He proved prison could contain his body without removing his claim. But the same grip that kept him boss also squeezed the Colombo family until it cracked into war. Carmine Persico kept the crown. The Colombos paid for how tightly he held it. Another popular question in the Mafia universe is, did John Gotti really rule the Gambinos from prison? The answer is yes and no. John Gotti kept the title, he kept the image, he kept loyal people around the family who still treated him as the boss. But he did not rule the Gambino family from prison the way a free boss ruled from a club, restaurant, car, or back room. After his 1992 life sentence, the throne stayed in his name, but the hands-on family business moved to men outside the walls. Gotti became more like a locked-away monarch than a working street boss. That distinction explains the whole prison era. On paper and in mob pride, he was still John Gotti, the boss who beat cases, took out Paul Castellano, ran the Ravenite, and turned himself into the public face of the Gambino family. In practice, prison cut him down to visits, monitored communication, lawyers, the family messages, and whatever information could move without creating another indictment. A boss can keep a title from prison. Running crews every day is another matter. When Gotti went away, the first real bridge was his son, John Jr. Gotti. Jr. became the acting boss, the man expected to carry the family's street administration, while his father remained the official boss. That was the family arrangement. Senior kept the crown, Junior carried the work. The move made emotional sense inside the Gotti circle, but it created trouble right away. Junior had the bloodline, but he did not have his father's fear, his father's courtroom aura, or his father's deep personal hold over old captains. The Gambino family had serious men still on the street. Nicholas Carozzo, Leonard Di Maria, Jackie D'Amico, Peter Gotti, and other administration-level figures or powerful captains all had their own lanes, their own crews, their own histories, and their own ideas about what the family needed after John went away. Junior could sit in the acting boss seat, but every major captain knew the difference between a son carrying a name and a boss who had earned the fear of the whole room. John Gotti Sr. still had connection, but it was filtered. He could receive updates. He could hear family matters through visits and trusted channels. He could give broad direction. He could approve or disapprove certain moves when messages reached him. But prison communication was watched, restricted, and dangerous. Every word risked becoming evidence. Every visitor risked becoming a pipeline investigators could follow. That meant Gotti's connection was real, but not clean enough to keep the whole family under tight control. The old Ravenite style was gone. Before prison, Gotti liked to see people. Captains came to him. Soldiers wanted to be seen around him. The club became a theatre of power, and federal agents used that theatre against him. After prison, he could not stand in the middle of that world anymore. The family had to operate without the boss's daily presence, and that changed the psychology of the organisation. Men who once waited for Gotti's face now had to deal with messengers, relatives, and acting bosses. Was it successful? Only in the narrowest sense. It kept the Gotti name on the throne for years. It stopped an immediate takeover by rival Gambino factions. It allowed the family to pretend continuity after the disaster of the 1992 conviction. It gave Junior a platform and kept Peter Gotti close to power. In that small way, the prison rule worked. The Gotti faction did not vanish overnight. But as a long-term strategy, it failed. The family weakened. The name became heavier than the structure underneath it. Gotti's fame had already brought intense federal pressure, and prison did not remove that pressure. It made the family easier to read in some ways. Investigators knew the power line ran through relatives and loyalists. Every attempt to keep the old boss connected created another trail. The same loyalty that kept the Gotti name alive also gave prosecutors a map of who still served it. Junior's acting boss period exposed the limits of inherited power. He tried to hold the seat, but he was trapped between his father's expectations and the reality of a changing mafia. He had to deal with crews that wanted money protected, law enforcement that was already watching. He also had his own legal pressure. By the late 1990s, Junior's position was damaged, and his eventual guilty plea cut the bridge between father and street even deeper. Peter Gotti became the next family name solution. Peter did not have John's charisma. He did not have Junior's youth. He was a Gotti, and that was his strongest credential. Under him, the family continued to carry the Gotti shadow. But the shadow was no longer enough to frighten every room into order. The Gambinos were still powerful, still dangerous, still wealthy, but they were no longer the clean machine Carlo Gambino had left behind, or the celebrity empire John Gotti believed he had built. The prison era also revealed how much Sammy Gravano had damaged the family. Sammy did not only help convict John Gotti, he gave the government the internal map. He explained ranks, murders, motives, orders, disputes, and administration logic. Once that map existed, every later Gotti attempt to rule from prison had to move through a landscape already drawn for investigators. The family could replace men. It could not replace secrecy once the underboss had taught the government how to read the house. Gotti's personal connection to the family after prison remained strongest through blood. Junior, Peter, the Gotti name. Loyalists who still believed the boss should not step down. That connection kept him symbolically alive inside the organization. But the further the years moved from 1992, the more the title turned ceremonial. Men still respected the name, feared the history, or hated the betrayal around Sammy. But business has a brutal rhythm. Crews need decisions. Money needs movement. Disputes need answers. A boss locked in a high-security prison cannot answer fast enough forever. The Commission and other New York families also had their own view. To them, Gotti from prison was a problem. A boss refusing to step aside could freeze succession, create legal heat, and keep a weakened faction alive past its natural ending. Other families did not gain from the Gambinos being run through a prison legend and relatives under surveillance. Quiet bosses wanted quiet money. Gotti's name still brought newspapers, prosecutors, and old grudges. The attempted revenge against Sammy Gravano showed the emotional side of the prison-era Gotti world. Even after everything, the family still carried the wound of Sammy's cooperation. Later allegations around Peter Gotti and a plot to kill Gravano in Arizona show that the old sentence against Sammy did not disappear when John went away. The Gotti faction still had memory. It still had anger. It still had men willing to discuss revenge. But that kind of move also showed the weakness of the era. The family was still reacting to the betrayal instead of rebuilding beyond it. So did Gotti have a real hand on the Gambinos after prison? Yes, but not the hand he had before. He had influence, title, family channels, emotional authority, and loyalists. He did not have smooth command. He did not have daily operational control. He did not have the ability to settle every dispute, watch every captain, punish every insult, and steer every racket. The prison wall turned him from boss into symbol, and symbols can inspire men, but they cannot run a crime family alone. The most accurate answer is this: Gotti ruled from prison as a name, not as a full working boss. His reign continued on paper and in loyalty, but the real street administration passed through Junior, Peter, and surviving Gambino captains. That arrangement kept the throne inside the Gotti family for a while, but it did not restore the power it had before 1992. It preserved the brand while the organization underneath it kept losing strength. By the time John Gotti died in 2002, the prison rule experiment had already shown its limits. The Gambino family survived him, but the Gotti era did not survive in the same form. The family moved away from the celebrity style. The old public swagger faded. Later leadership became quieter, more cautious and less attached to courtroom fame. That was the final verdict on Gotti's prison rule. It kept his name alive longer than his freedom lasted, but it could not keep his style alive after the family counted the cost. The audience question always sounds simple. Did John Gotti still control the Gambinos from prison? The deeper answer is colder. He controlled enough to block a clean break, enough to keep his son and brother near power, enough to make loyalists still look toward him. He did not control enough to save the family from indictments, faction stress, leadership decline, and the end of the Gotti myth as a working system. Prison did not remove John Gotti from the Gambino story. It turned him into the weight the family had to carry until it finally moved on. Another popular question in the Mafia universe is, what happened to Victor Amuso's rule after Anthony Casso was locked up? Once Anthony Gaspipe Casso was locked up in 1993, Victor Amuso's prison rule entered a different phase. Before that, the Lucchese family had been living under the shadow of two men, Amuso as boss and Casso as the violent underboss who helped enforce the regime. After Casso was taken off the street, Amuso had to rule without the one man most associated with fear inside his administration. That changed the family's rhythm. The boss was in prison, the underboss was gone. The street had to be rebuilt through acting bosses, loyal captains, and men who could keep money moving without letting the family split apart. The question is not whether Amuso still had a connection. He did. The question is how strong that connection was once Casso was removed from the board. Amuso remained the official boss in the eyes of loyalists, and his name still carried enough force to influence appointments, demotions, contracts, faction moves, and long-term direction. But the family was no longer being held together by a boss and underboss operating as a paired threat. Now Amuso had to govern through layers. Every layer created distance. Every distance created opportunity for someone outside to grow. The first problem after Casso was trust. The Lucchese family had already been shaken by informants, convictions, murders, attempted murders, and fear left over from the Amuso-Casso years. Men had been marked, men had flipped, men had disappeared from the street into federal custody. The family did not need only orders, it needed a calmer structure. A boss in prison could not simply bark commands and expect the family to repair itself. The Luccheses needed a street administration that could earn, negotiate, lower the temperature, and still respect Amuso's claim. Joseph Little Joe De Fede became one of the major answers. De Fede was not the loudest figure in the family, but he became important as acting boss during the prison rule period. He represented a working street layer under Amuso's official title. His role was to keep the family functioning, especially in money lanes that still mattered. Garment district rackets, labour connections, loans, gambling, and street tribute still needed day-to-day supervision. De Fede gave Amuso a man outside who could sit closer to the business than the imprisoned boss ever could. Stephen Wonderboy Crea was another critical piece. Crea represented the Bronx strength and the construction union side of the family. He was more than a placeholder. He had real earning power, real respect, and real reach in legitimate-looking rackets. Construction and union money gave the Lucchese family a cleaner, stronger engine after the old bloodletting. Crea's importance showed where the family's survival was moving. The future was not only Brooklyn fear, it was Bronx discipline, construction influence, labour rackets, and quieter money. Louis Bagels Didone became another major Amuso loyalist. Didone's value came from street control, pressure, discipline, and loyalty to the boss. He was the kind of man an imprisoned boss could use to keep crews from drifting too far from the official line. As the family tried to stabilise, Didone gave Amuso a harder edge outside the wall. De Fede could handle acting boss administration. Crea could handle major earning lanes. Didone could keep the street side reminded that Amuso still had power in the organisation, even from prison. The difficulty was faction geography. The Lucchese family had Brooklyn history, Bronx strength, Long Island crews, Manhattan money, New Jersey interests, and old loyalties that did not all point in one direction. Amuso and Casso had come out of the Brooklyn side, but the family's older power base had deep Bronx roots. Once Casso was locked up, the question underneath everything became sharper. Would the family remain under a Brooklyn-centered prison boss, or would the Bronx faction slowly become the real engine while Amuso kept the title? That tension shaped the entire post-Casso era. Amuso needed Crea and the Bronx people, but the more they earned and stabilized the family, the more important they became. A prison boss needs strong men outside. Strong men outside become dangerous if they start looking like the real government. That was the same trap Amuso had to manage again and again. The family could not survive with weak acting leaders, but strong acting leaders could become too independent. Big Frank Lastarino belonged to the older, hard side of the family and became part of the faction pressure in the early post-Casso period. George Zappola, Frank Papagni, Frank Gioia Jr., and other Brooklyn-linked figures moved through the same dangerous atmosphere. These were not background names. They represented the side of the family that could still think in terms of plots, removals, and restoring power through violence. The Lucchese family after Casso was trying to look stable while still carrying men trained by a brutal era. One of the major dangers came through the attempted movement against Crea. The Brooklyn loyalist side did not like the idea of Crea and Defe shifting the family's centre back toward the Bronx. A plot formed around removing Crea and possibly changing the family's direction again. That plot did not mature into the kind of open war that could have destroyed the family, but it showed how fragile Amuso's prison rule was. Even men who accepted his title could fight over which outside faction got to interpret his power. The mid-90s became a restructuring period. Amuso had to use what remained after trials and convictions hit the family's most unstable men. Defed stayed important as acting boss. Crea stayed important as underboss and earning power. Didone rose as consigliere and a trusted street figure. Joseph Joe C. Caridi stepped up around Didone's former crew. The structure was not clean, but it was workable. Instead of one man outside holding everything, Amuso used multiple pieces to divide influence and keep no single faction completely free from him. For a while, that worked. The Lucchese family became quieter than it had been during the worst Amuso-Casso years. The family still had rackets, it still had crews, it still had construction and union money, it still had garment activity, gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and street collections. It was battered, but not dead. Amuso's title survived. The family did not collapse into open civil war. That is the strongest argument that his prison rule had real power. But the Defade problem revealed the darker side of Amuso's control. Defade had been useful but later fell out of favour. Amuso reportedly put a contract on him, and Defade eventually became a government witness after realising he was in danger. This was a major failure for the prison boss. Defade was not some distant associate. He had been acting boss. When an acting boss turns, it tells the world the prison system of trust has broken at the highest street level. The Defade situation also showed Amuso's mindset. He did not treat acting leadership as independent authority. If a man outside became too risky, too disloyal, or too far from Amuso's confidence, he could be cut down no matter what role he had held. That helped preserve fear, but it damaged trust. Men could see that serving as acting boss did not guarantee safety. It could make a man more exposed. After Defede, Didone moved higher. When Crea was hit with legal trouble and went away, Didone became acting boss and carried the family's street administration. Didone's rise made sense from Amuso's view. He was loyal, hard, and more connected to the Amuso line than the Bronx faction. But Didone's own eventual conviction in the early 2000s removed another street boss from the board. Once again, prison rule depended on a man outside. Once again, the man outside was taken away. That led to the ruling panel period. Instead of trusting one acting boss with too much power, Amuso moved toward a committee-style arrangement. Senior captains such as Aniello Neal Migliore, Matthew Madonna, and Joseph Joey D. DiNapoli became part of the leadership structure that handled day-to-day activity. This was a practical move. A panel could divide responsibility, reduce the danger of one acting boss becoming too strong, and keep the family functioning while Amuso remained the official boss. The panel also showed the limits of the system. A ruling panel can stabilize a family, but it can also blur authority. Captains may cooperate while money is good, but every faction still watches for advantage. Migliore had old standing, Madonna had Bronx weight, De Napoli had experience and reach. These were not empty chairs. They were powerful men sharing space under an imprisoned boss. The arrangement worked as a pressure valve, not as a perfect government. Crea's return later restored a stronger working administration. He came back into leadership after prison and eventually held major street authority again. His return showed that the family still needed the Bronx earning machine. No matter how much Amuso wanted to keep the final crown and preserve loyal influence, the practical reality remained clear. Construction, unions, and Bronx leadership were central to Lucchese's survival. Amuso could not rule only through Brooklyn loyalty. He had to use the men who could actually keep the money moving. That balance lasted for years, but it never erased the old tension. Amuso remained the official boss, yet the family's working strength often sat with men outside who had their own crews, earning lanes and faction identities. The family could call Amuso boss, but every street administration had to answer a daily question. How much did they really need to send upward? And how much could they handle themselves? The clearest proof of Amuso's long reach came much later, when testimony described a 2017 letter from Amuso ordering a leadership change. That letter placed Michael Big Mike DeSess into the acting boss role, replacing Matthew Madonna Pettinger, and it reportedly carried the threat of violence if the Bronx faction refused to step aside. Decades after Casso was locked up, Amuso's name was still strong enough to move the family's leadership from prison. That is not symbolic power. That is operational power travelling through a written command. Michael DeSantis represented a return of Brooklyn influence. He came from the old Amuso-Casso crew orbit, gave the imprisoned boss a loyalist closer to his original base. Patty Red Delarusso and Andrew DeSimone later became part of the new leadership picture around that shift. The move suggested that Amuso had never stopped watching the balance between Bronx and Brooklyn power. Even after decades in prison, he still cared who held the street chair, which faction-controlled administration, and whether his own loyal line remained alive inside the family. So, what do we know about Amuso's prison rule after Casso? It was real, long-lasting, and unusually resilient. He did not disappear after his underboss was locked up. He did not lose the title when acting bosses rose and fell. He kept enough loyalists to influence the family through De Fede Didone panels, Crea, Madonna, and later DeSantis. He could still approve leadership changes, punish disloyalty, and shape faction balance from inside prison. But was it successful? The answer depends on the measure. As personal rule, it was successful. Amuso remained boss for decades. He survived Casso's removal, informants, faction pressure, acting boss failures, and generational change. Few imprisoned bosses kept that kind of claim for that long. His title did not become empty right away. It kept returning in real decisions. As a family system, it was mixed. The Lucchese family survived, stayed active, and avoided the kind of open destruction that could have followed the early 90s collapse. But the family also endured constant leadership churn. De Fede turned, Didone went away, panels shifted, Crea returned and was later hit with major legal trouble. Madonna was replaced, DeSantis was installed through prison authority. The structure kept working, but it never became fully free of the problem created by an official boss ruling from a cell. Amuso's greatest difficulty was not weakness, it was control over distance. He could influence the family, but he had to trust people outside to carry his will. Every acting boss became both necessary and dangerous. Every faction could claim loyalty while building its own strength. Every major legal case could remove the man currently holding the street together. Amuso's rule survived by adapting, replacing, dividing, and restoring loyalists when he could. His greatest success was endurance. After Casso was locked up, many expected the old regime to fade. Instead, Amuso remained a central force in the Lucchese family for decades. The family changed shape around him, but it did not fully escape him. That is the strange power of his prison era.